will the transition from V4 to V6 affect my mother in her living room? Will it affect Joe consumer? And do they have to be the guinea pigs, or are they going to be, I guess, are they going to feel our error of not doing the transition earlier? Are they going to feel it?
So can you hear me? So I hope not. I hope we can do it such that it's transparent to the vast majority of users, and only maybe the early adopters who want to try stuff out soon, or like in the Comcast trials now, have to do this. We've screwed up if all those people have to know about this.
Yeah, I want to add that there's really no lack of support, or from a vendor perspective, we've had IPv6 enabled products for 10 years or so, and Cisco as well as Microsoft, Linux, you name it. I mean, everything out there is already IPv6 enabled. So the grandma in the house shouldn't really have to see any difference. It should be a smooth transition for her. I think for people in here, what needs to be tested is more the local application, the homegrown intra-web servers or whatever that are kind of funky and nobody touched for 15 years because they has worked. Those are the ones that you need to spend time testing. But the off-the-shelf, hardware and software, I don't think, of course you need to test, but I don't think that's where the big problem is going to be.
So towards that end, unfortunately, it appears, as I said earlier, that with a lot of home gateways and set-top boxes not being V6 capable, grandma's going to see it because she's going to have to go down to Fry's or whatever your local electronics store is, or go to their provider and shell out another 50 or whatever dollars are necessary to buy a device that's enabled potentially. So does grandma know whether it's V4 or V6? Not so much. Does grandma's wallet know? Maybe. And that's really the challenge.
And who's going to hook up grandma's router anyway?
I was going to say, so when your next door neighbor buys a new internet connection, and unfortunately the ISP can't get V4 addresses, and they install the connection, the poor guy who does that installation has got to turn on something on the wireless side or on the local Ethernet cable. Increasingly it's wireless because, well, that's just what's expected. So you're that guy and you're going to set this up. Now, this is a service call. You've got 5 of them you have to do today, and you've got 1 hour and 15 minutes each, and you're being timed by it. Now, if you turn on V4, it's quite likely that her computer will work and everything will work, and it'll use, well, network 10, because that's how you set up the last 20 houses. So you're going to use network 10, okay, and it's just going to work. Whether that box has V6 or V4 that could be turned on, the guy who turns it on isn't going to turn on V6 until that neighbor or your grandma has a device that requires V6 to be turned on, because it's not in his interest to. All they want is internet service. They didn't ask for V6, and V4 is going to work in 99.9% of the cases, even if it is gatewayed and tunneled when it gets back to the service provider's core. So I guess people need to understand we're running out of IP addresses to connect up CPEs, and those are going to end up with V6. There's already some service providers around here who actually provision a V6 address to every CPE and then do the V4 address dynamically. That's going to become increasingly common, but that still doesn't mean that there's any driver to turn on V6 for the actual consumer.
So I'll give it to the grandma who wants to answer the grandma question in a second. But I agree with John in terms of the, quotes, typical internet service. But in Japan, we actually see an example of how this can be done in a way that is transparent. A service is offered TV over IP. It's actually over IPv6. The service requires IPv6. People go acquire TV service. They don't acquire IPv6, they acquire TV service, right? But because of the economic infrastructure that they've got, the box that makes that all happen is part of the service. That doesn't exist in all regions in the world, right? So here you might actually have to go buy the box. Dave mentioned earlier, it's hundreds of billions when you add up across all of the service providers that might have to supply these set-top boxes. They're not going to go do that unless they have to, right? And if they have to pass that charge along, how do they do that in a way that allows people to not notice that it hit their wallet? So with that, I'll pass it on.
So I just want to say, if Grandpa wants to get his V6, because Grandma already knew how to do it. Anyway, isn't this analogous to HDTV, say? If you want HDTV as a service from whoever's offering it, you have to have the right kind of equipment. And the vendors, I'm going to say operators like the cable companies or the telecommunications providers or whomever, they're going to have geographic areas where they don't offer HDTV because they're going to roll it out in a phased way. So even if you want it and you bought your HDTV and you plug it in, it may or may not work. So that's, again, it brings us all back to this interoperability thing. So the operators have to know which equipment's going to interoperate when they offer IPv6, and they've got to bundle that as part of their service requirements or criteria. And then the vendors have to make sure that they're moving so that they interoperate with the infrastructure that's out there so that they can be in the next wave of services that get offered. Basically, IPv4 is self-limiting as a business opportunity. It's finite. I mean, you can go out and you can have a market and sell your addresses, but it's still finite. You can't grow your business. So anyone that wants to grow their business has got to figure out a way to have an interoperable solution end-to-end so that Grandpa can go out and buy his HDTV, know he's going to get HDTV service from his operator, and that it works end-to-end. So I just think it's a part of a whole system.
I'm going to ask a question that I'd like to know the answer to, and that is the IPv4 market. Now, our two end panelists will have maybe the pseudo-legal answer, and then I'd like to hear from everyone else. So, but will the IPv4 market be a white market, a gray market, or will it be a black market? And is it going to be allowed?
I can answer this really clearly. So, in the Arran region, there's a policy called specified transfer. And it basically says if someone applies for address space, and we determine they have need for address space, but for some reason they don't get the address space from Arran, example, we're out, okay? Then they can get address space from someone else. They can find Bob or Tim or John and drag them over and say, Bob has address space, I need address space. Rather than fulfilling it from Arran because you have none, I'm going to get it from Bob. We'll update the records to reflect that, okay? The party still has to need addresses, and they still have to qualify. So you still apply for address space just like you do, only rather than getting the addresses from Arran because there's nothing in the free pool, you can get it from any other party you want that has address space. Not a problem. So that provides things that look like a market in that, yeah, you can take address space that you don't need and give it to someone who needs it, and it's quite possible they'll pay you. They might pay you money. They might have pictures of you. I don't know why you're giving them the address space, and Aaron's not going to ask. All we need is you and them to show up and say, we agree. It's even possible for you to auction off your address space. You could say, I have this /16, and I'm only using half of it, and I could renumber to get everything clean and free up the other half, and I'd like to auction off a /17. The only people who could actually get that 17 are people who qualified for it, but you can do it, and we've worked with a number of parties to make sure we'll have the right mechanisms in place. Is that a market? Depends on your definition of market. It does look like one, it feels like one, it encourages better use of the address space, but it doesn't meet some people's definitions because there's a limited number of providers and a little number of acquirers.
So another piece of this that I alluded to, and John's also working on this, is with respect to a technology called secure interdomain routing. And what this allows for is to check the origin autonomous system, who actually is supposed to have been allocated that particular address block or that particular address. And you can check that against the certificate that an RIR would hold. So whether this enables a title-like system or title-like market or a leasing market or one that gives some control over who's supposed to be allocating that beyond just necessarily the time that an RIR can update the registry, or if this is done under the table for $1 million or whatever the case is over there in the back of the room. There are technologies emerging in which this can be done securely, where you can at least attempt to verify that the origin autonomous system was supposed to announce a particular prefix. So again, this solves a couple of problems. One problem, if somebody's hijacking an address for nefarious purposes. Another one is it enables this title and leasing market to potentially emerge.
So one other comment on that is I mean, I think we all agree we're going to see some sort of thing that looks like a market for smaller and smaller blocks of IPv4 addresses. The real downside of this is, and if people can get ISPs to route them, it's going to cause the routing tables to grow quite quickly, which is going to turn into a really big problem if we're not careful.
So,
Stephan? Sorry.
yeah, I don't really believe in this market, because we need to remember that there's a source and a destination in all communication, and even if you have v4 addresses, you won't be able to communicate to any v6 services. So it's like buying a Hummer when everybody else is moving to hybrids. I don't see why you want to pick up, some old /16 that somebody else used and try to live. It's not about you. It's not about what you have available. It's what the rest of the internet is going towards. And the big content providers out there, the Google and the Facebook and the MySpace, whatever of the world, are already moving to v6. So there's no really reason for you to stay and continue doing v4. So it's just better to just move to v6 and be done with it.
So you asked actually a three-part question. Right? Is it white, black, or gray, right? And the answer is yes. It already exists in that form. I've actually talked to people who make a full-time consulting business out of helping people move within the rules and effectively operate the market. But it's all completely hidden today. It'll start moving, as I said earlier, onto eBay, right? To be slightly contradictory to your point, small startup, supplier of something in Singapore goes to eBay, gets /29, because that's what they can get. They're supplying services to big corporation in Australia, right? As much as the engineering team in the Australian ISPs would like to filter out that 29, the big customer is a big customer. The business side of the house will say, no, make it work, because big customer is paying us to get to small supplier. We've seen this play out. 10 years ago, this all happened. We watched this movie, and this is exactly what happened. The business side of the house said, make it work. It doesn't matter what happens to the routing table. So, Dave and I will stand here and sell you the biggest, fastest routers we can possibly make at an unconstrained rate. And I used to feel bad about that, but
I don't think I have anything to add. It's a finite thing. It's kind of going to be like having a Picasso at some point in time. It's nice to hang on your wall, but it's not going to be very useful. Beautiful, but maybe not useful.
But also
John, do you have
expensive.
anything else to say?
I'm going to pick up.
It's expensive.
I'm going to pick up on what Tony said. I'm going to agree and disagree with him. So the agreement is, and same thing Bob said, we're going to see organizations attempt to route smaller and smaller blocks. If you're getting connected to the internet, the reality is, as a new business, if you had a choice, you'd probably want to be connected with v4 just because that works for a number of purposes. And if the only thing you can do is get a /28 from your friend, you'd ask your ISP to route it. So we're going to see, this brings home, by the way, the fact that the value of the internet is uniqueness. You really don't care whether you have one address, 5 addresses, or 10 addresses. One address and NAT is enough to get the job done. So the reality is that poor /24 actually could let 200 organizations or 256 organizations connect if we could all route it as a /32. Isn't that fun? So there's going to be enormous pressure on the routing table. Now, with respect to market, I will say that, there are going to be organizations, there's already organizations today attempting to make a black market work. But you're not going to see a responsible business build its business plan on that. If you take a look at a major ISP in any country, they're not going to go to their board and go, we're going to get some addresses from under the table, and we're going to do this, and that's how we're going to keep the company running, okay? For two reasons. One, it's unsavory at a very large number of levels. Second is, when someone reports that to Aaron, well, that's fraud, and our policies are clear. The community adopted those policies. We zero out the entry, and then we reissue it to a legitimate provider. So you could suddenly find yourself with Verizon camped on the address space you thought you acquired because that wasn't valid, okay? Boy, you got to pay, and you ended up doing deceit, and you have no address space, and the space is being routed by someone else. You're at the bottom of the winning equation there. So we're really not expecting there to be a black market of size for responsible companies. There may be some along the edges, but increasingly the risk side of the equation is particularly ugly.
Within the Aaron region, other regions are not quite as strenuous with their application of the rules.
Today. Yeah. Like a Picasso. Okay. Elise, I think Elise needs to leave now, but first of all, I guess maybe if everyone could thank one here. And we're running a little bit late, but I'd like to, this is a great opportunity here. I have tons of questions, but I'd like to open the mic up to the floor and see if there's any questions.
Sorry, two quick ones. On the use and non-use of IPv6, I think the users will be suffering a lot if they don't use IPv6, because we are moving to CGN. And in CGN, we don't share IP addresses, we'll be sharing ports. Most of the top applications use up to 200 ports. So the ISPs are going to use CGN as a kind of service differentiator and must probably give those that pay extra money more ports than the others. If you go down to 20 ports, most probably you'll not see Google Maps anymore, just see patches of it. So this is a dramatic thing that's happening to kind of net neutrality, which is disappearing in front of our eyes. Second item is, I was in Portugal doing the launch of V6 at the Portuguese operator, and they received their last IPv4 block back in June, and they started distributing it. And they found out that that address space is used by others. So this is what's called the dirty address space. So I don't know how many blocks are dirty. Thank you.
So what's interesting, although this wasn't a conference today about carrier-grade NATs or large-scale NATs, what's interesting, and we can talk about this at another opportunity, the data of the number of open ports per user, whether they're TCP or UDP, and whether or not and how long-lived they are. And so what's interesting is that from the stats that we've seen in provider networks in measuring this, CGNs appear and are being built that can handle the scale. Remember, every user is not using 200 open ports continuously. Not all of them are TCP. And so given this, and given the law of averages and the ability to build this type of equipment, again, building the NAT isn't the problem. Most likely the problem is operating the NAT and understanding how to see a subscriber based upon their port in a new operational mindset. So as vendors, I'm sure Tony over there and certainly RNAT, we're not afraid of building them.
So I want to add something about this, the number of ports in carrier-grade NAT. I wish it was a bigger problem than it is, but you can actually have multiple connections from one port. I mean, just look at web traffic. If I download a 2 gig file from redhat.com, that doesn't mean that redhat.com's web server is just occupied and cannot serve anybody else over port 80, right? So why would that happen in a NAT situation? I don't believe in that things. You can scale NAT.
I actually think we've already seen the business case that's caused V6 to be deployed with respect to carrier-grade NATs in the form of the largest content companies saying, yeah, I understand you, I understand it might work, that's all wonderful, dual stack isn't that hard for me to do to make sure I don't have to go through a carrier-operated box to get to the customer I'm trying to get to. So I think it's driven the content side. I don't know if it'll ever drive the living room. The other question, though, on dirty address space, I just want to say, all the RIRs are, we have, as we're getting to the bottom of the barrel, and Elise, unfortunately, is gone, we do have some cases where some of the addresses blocks have been already utilized. We are all working with organizations, RIPE, Merit, who are willing to do scanning to see if they can find it on the address space. But I don't know of an RIR that if an allocation's given out and it turns out to be unusable because it's been squatted on by someone, that won't take that allocation back and reissue space. So if you run into someone who gets an unusable address block because a spammer has been using it or some equipment vendor hardwired an address so all of their equipment spews packets at that, you just need to go back to the RIR and return the block and get a new one issued. That works for now. That won't work in 12 months.
So we have an additional question here.
So just one more thing on the carrier grade NAT, just to talk about network architecture associated with this. You know, from the work that I've done, I'm seeing around each and every edge router 13 to 20 appliances being deployed in singleton fashion around those routers. And the way these CGNs are being built is using what's in the field already. Asking somebody to deploy something, a new piece of kit or hardware is very difficult and challenging from a financial point of view. So when you already have HTTP proxies, and you already have firewalls, and you already have DPIs, and you already have all of these other devices that are out there that already scale along the exact same trajectory as what we've talked about for NATs or already perform NAT-like functions, this is the way they're being deployed.
What do you mean?
Well, what I mean is that the appliances that are already performing the functions are that may be enabled to perform the function and not have it turned on, or are already performing the function. So although we're worried about multiple hierarchies or multiple levels of hierarchy of CGNs, we're already seeing this type of packet manipulation being done in the network today.
Okay, let's take a question.
Thank you, panel. I'm a system administrator from Florida, but when I'm not doing my day job, I also play video games. I use the internet. I have friends who work on networks. I have friends who just barely know how to use a computer. And I think that the biggest thing that hasn't been discussed in this room, actually two things. One, applications, and two, education. When I say applications, I mean, almost all the presentations this morning and yesterday, we're talking about address exhaustion. We're running out of addresses. We're running out of addresses. Well, then that's where the education problem comes in. Educational problem is that the people I know, when they think they're running out of addresses, they're just going to go plug in another NAT router into another NAT router and think that it works. Regarding what he was saying back there about ports and what that, he's absolutely right about that, because when you do NAT, you're having to borrow ports from the previous device to get it to work on the next device. At some point, you're going to saturate and make things incredibly difficult for people to use. So there's this educational gap of where people are being told, well, we're just running out of addresses, but not being explained as to other problems that we're running into as we deploy all these solutions and whatnot. And there's also this fascination where we have this stuff, and there's neat things with VSIS, like reading about, like, you know, simpler packets, you know, being able to do things like BitTorrent and whatnot, all these nice little applications and what like that. When it comes from an app developer perspective, it seems like it almost like a toy phase. Like back in 2005, you had people playing around with 64-bit Windows apps and IPv6 apps. I haven't seen any resurgence in that. All these new games coming out, like World of Warcraft and whatnot, they're still not using these texts. They're still using the old text, and I don't see anyone talking about migrating them forward. So
in fact, that's a significant part of the problem is how do we get the app developers to realize that this is occurring? Education, like you mentioned, right? Most people perceive this to be the broadband provider's problem, as John said, right? They're the ones that have the addresses that are handing them out at the edge, but in fact, it really is an app problem. If apps were really built according to design. And you can go talk to Martin, because he's actually got some nice text in his bag back there that explains how easy this actually is. But if applications were designed with layering in mind the way people believe they are, this wouldn't be a problem. But application developers constantly try to outsmart the stack. They believe that they can do a better job of optimizing the communications than whatever the OS does. And they reach down and grab information they shouldn't know, right? And that's embedded, there's all kinds of stuff with hard-coded 32-bit assumptions. And that's just going to be hard to find and fix. This gets back to the testing point. How do you actually nail those all down? Well, you have to just try it, right? So we've all been talking about get V6 turned on, get V6 turned on, but you know the real test comes when you turn V4 off. That's an interesting thing to do. Do it to people who have spent 20 years learning V4. That's what they know. They're experts in the field of V4. Turn off V4 and watch them just scream at their screen, bang on their keyboards. I've done this, right? We sit in the back of the room at Nanog, turn off V4. People are literally yelling at their computers. You know, real addresses have dots in them, not these damn colons, right? It's a mindset shift, and it's going to take probably a generation to get us past this. But applications are a key component of it, and it gets back to testing. You do have to test it. I think somebody on the other side wanted it.
Okay, John.
I have a question. How many websites do you know are on your network, public websites?
My company, there's right about 5 or 6 public websites, almost all of them are. The only one that we don't have V6 enabled right now is our big one. That's because we have old code in it, only old code in it.
Right. So I said we're running out of addresses just like everyone else. I also said get your public-facing servers dual-homed V4 and V6. It's important to put those two messages together. A lot of people realize, oh, you're running out of addresses. Well, I have them. I'm already connected. That's great. I can go home now. Okay? We're running out of addresses, and new broadband customers are going to get connected with new technology, and you need to at least pay attention to your public websites because of that. That's the complete first message. It's not we're running out, because for a lot of people, they think we're running out, but I'm connected, and they end the sentence there. It's we're running out, we're going to use new technology. If you want to be connected to the full internet, you need both V4 and V6 on your public servers. Now, if everyone did that, we're done. Again, if every bit of content was dual-homed V4 and V6, you could connect to the internet with V6 and get everywhere. Substantially, we'd be done. You could actually go to all your homes, living rooms, enterprise, office desks, laptops, and switch them over the next day. So the content is the huge message, and getting that done is important. Now let's talk about a very particular content, the gaming industry. I've been at a lot of shows. I did 61 presentations so far this year. It's a busy time. And that included a gaming conference, and I'll be going out again to the Gaming Executive Conference. There are folks in the gaming industry well aware this is coming. These are the same folks who spend a lot of time trying to optimize their infrastructure so that when you're playing a game, all you players are on a level playing field and someone doesn't end up, you know, permanently 150 milliseconds faster than everyone else. Turns out in a first-person shooter, this is very bad to be 100 milliseconds behind everyone else. Well, so imagine the world where suddenly we start connecting broadband customers up with V6, and to get to a V4 gaming infrastructure, it goes through a gateway. Now, I understand the carriers are going to build great gateways with enormous capacity and perfect first-in, first-out queues and no latency. Right, okay? I believe that.
Jump over really tall buildings, too.
Right. But when the guy buys the one that they can afford, okay, there's going to be some latency involved. And the gaming companies are very aware of this. There are gaming companies right now working on making their infrastructure V6 reachable for this reason. Will it matter? Yeah. In fact, at the point in time when we get a large number of broadband customers who are connected via V6, not V4, for whom V4 is a transition access, you'll see gaming companies say, I've got games that you can use and you're not penalized. And suddenly, that will swing the market, because the moment that new broadband customers choose those games that are V6 connected as native infrastructure, the others will have to enable their infrastructure. We've got 3 to 5 years before we see the first V6 enabled gaming infrastructure. but it's coming.
So we have, I think we're going to do the last question because we want to try and get back on track, give people a chance to grab some food and make it back for 1:30. So I know we're going to make this close. So Stan.
Thanks. John, you're left out of this question, sorry. All of you are vendors of some sort, except John. How important is parity between IPv6 features and IPv4 features to your company?
Well, I'm not sure what parity means, but the message. Yeah, I mean, the message we've gotten from our customers is either we do a good job supporting V6 or they're going to buy from another vendor. That got everyone's attention, and so I think it's parity. And if our customers, if we want to continue serving our customers, we do a good job supporting V6.
So at Juniper, we spend a lot of time doing gap analysis, making sure we have parity. And in particular, of course, we've got the control plane, which you need to worry about, management access, but in the forwarding plane is really where router and switch vendors work very, very hard. And in this particular case, the reality of the situation, and I'm not going to say anything the room doesn't know, is that there's equipment that was built at a generation in which it is not optimized for V6, and there's the equipment that comes after at that line in the sand in which it's fully optimized for both V4 and V6 at incredibly small packets with the full features. The focus for V6 is enabling the kit that is available that can optimize for V6. The second you've got a line card and you're punting 10 gigs of something to a software forwarding path on a little tiny line card CPU, that's a big challenge. But we focus very, very clearly and to a great extent on the hardware, which has all of those optimizations in place. And so we aren't shipping equipment anymore in the router space that is not and does not have parity with V4 on both features and forwarding and packets per second.
So I believe from Secure 64, all our products have complete parity. There's a few things missing that I'm aware of that we don't have in V6. It's also important to look at stuff that's, new stuff that's coming out in V6 and how you can support those. I mean, it's not only about parity because there's stuff that's different, like, reverse delegation of IPv6 and DNS, for example, is something you can't do as you did in V4, and we're looking into, how to solve those kinds of problems as well.
So, as Dave said, parity is very important, and people pay a lot of attention to that, but I want to take one step back and say you need to consider it in terms of functional parity, not feature parity. You have to be a little bit careful there because you don't necessarily need an ARP cache, right? You have to think about what's the functional equivalent of that, not necessarily the feature parity version of it. It's, there are things that just don't map cleanly, so you have to be careful when you ask for this. And I also want to turn it back a little bit to you and say, for vendors as a group, not any one of us in particular, but for vendors as a group, our level of importance on parity is based on the demand we hear from customers. If we don't hear demand for parity from customers, it's not important, right? And so, yes, it's important. We all will say this is important because we have been working on this. We know that. There are other vendors who are not at this table who are not worried about it because they're not hearing it from you, the customer. And if the customers are not asking, they're not going to do it, right? So it's a education in multiple directions problem. Yes, we can all sit here and tell you what we know. You can share amongst yourselves. Find all of your other friends. Every vendor you buy from, ask them what their V6 parity issues are. Because if you don't start asking for it, you won't get it. And I see a hand at the back.
Yeah, I do want to mention that one of the questions I typically have for vendors are, have you been keeping track of how many people are calling you asking about IPv6 features? Most vendors don't even ask it. They have no way of measuring it until they start seeing something hit their bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, there's an infinite number of marketing people from your favorite vendors that are constantly out there whose sole job is dedicated to talking about IPv6, network architectures, and V4, V6 transition. So as you know, traditionally the way vendors respond or hear from their customers is through an RFP process. So we're out there, and this is just statement of fact of how the business works, we're out there describing a whole bunch of different network architectures, features, functionality, V4 and V6, from all the companies out there to all the potential customers they could possibly have. And really what Tony's saying through the friends and family plan is that it shows up via RFPs and it shows up via questions, queries, conferences like this. And so they're critical to be continued.
All right. Well, with that, oh, I'm sorry, John, you got one more. You were, oh, it's been, okay, it was fragmented there. All right, go ahead.
I will tell you that this also affects your purchasing policy. So, Aaron will not, in 2012, be buying services from companies that we can't access their website via V6. So, we've already informed our benefits management program and our healthcare company, and we just will evaluate them, and if their website's V4 only, then we don't consider them having a website. We only look at the features we can reach over IPv6, because we expect we will have customers and employees trying to access these features via devices that are going to need to have native V6 access to have good performance. So we've actually begun to revise our purchasing plan, and that's something that other people need to look at. You are going to have employees and you're going to have students, and you're going to have partners who access you via V6, okay? That means anything you use to build your solution, if it's not a V6-based service, you've got to ask yourself why you're buying it.
Okay, everybody. We are 1:15. We are going to start at 1:45, 30-minute lunch, and please thank our panelists here.